What do you want? An open door, a fine pair of yellow shoes, or just that black bottom? Ask and you shall receive. Welcome to Channel 8.5.
Hello and welcome back to Channel 8.5, a podcast about film, television, and pop culture. My name is Andrew Hanna.
I am Joe Galino.
Joe, another week, another Netflix release, although this one's a bit special. What are we talking about?
We're talking about an older movie. The last few weeks, most of the time, we talk about the new releases, or as close to the new releases as possible. This one, we're talking about more of an Oscar movie. Came out a few weeks ago, actually probably a couple of months ago now at this point. It's Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
And Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is inspired by the life and career of Ma Rainey, of course. The mother of blues.
Mother of the blues.
In 1920 Chicago, where you're from. Well,
exactly.
Not 1920s,
I'm from 1927 Chicago.
But Ma Rainey is played by the wonderful Viola Davis, and it follows a tense day wherein her and her band are in the recording studio. And Chadwick Boseman, the last film he was in, he plays Levy, a young, ambitious trumpet player who bumps heads with the band leader and then also Ma Rainey over creative differences and a love triangle that is foreign to the times, to say the least.
It's interesting you say that it's a love triangle because when I think back about this, do not really consider the love triangle part of the emotional core of this movie at all.
No, I agree. I think more than anything, it's meant to convey his character's recklessness.
It more drives the plot forward, and even so much plot I put in air quotes because this is not a plot movie. This is not a thriller. It's based on a play, an August Wilson play, same guy who wrote Fences. And it has been Denzel Washington's mission in life to bring all of August Wilson's plays to the screen. Viola Davis was also in Fences, which Denzel was in. This is the second one they've done. I don't know what he's got planned for the rest of them.
I think the next one might be the piano lesson. He's basically doing, I guess there's a group of plays called the Century Cycle. And so he's adapting them to the screen. And August Wilson, like Joe said, was the accomplished African-American playwright, but he also cast Viola Davis in a lot of his plays prior to dying. So it just makes sense that she is cast in these, but also just, I mean, it's Viola Davis. She's just phenomenal.
And she's almost unrecognizable in this.
Her transformation was astounding. I mean, her performance was so dominating, which was not only characteristic of Viola Davis. I mean, even when she was up against Meryl Streep, I mean, she stole the show in that one scene in, I think it was Doubt. That was the film, yeah.
With Philip Seymour Hoffman as well.
But also she was just perfect in that role. She was aggressive, yet kind and passionate and just big. Like it felt as though she took up so much space in the room that no one could flinch without being crushed by her. And despite her big performance, it was also very subtle and quiet in the right moments. Like the moment where she's talking about blues and her love of music with Coleman Domingo, his name's Cutler in the film. He's kind of her band leader.
Yep.
It feels so natural and just so subtle in the right way.
Oh, and she gets to do a lot of things in this movie too.
Yeah.
Nobody in this movie is one note. And I will say that it's difficult to talk about this movie and in terms of describing what happens, because if you really laid it out, not a ton happens. It takes place, like you said, over one day during a recording session in Chicago. And really the crux of the movie isn't Ma Rainey. It is with the band, the Ma Rainey band, in the rehearsal studio as they just bounce off of each other and talk. That's really what this movie is just people in rooms talking. And it is always a play. There's never a moment in the movie where it did not feel like it wasn't a play, and that did not bother me one bit.
Yeah, initially I didn't really read much about it. I watched a trailer and I think it did mention that it was based on a play, but I don't think I noticed it because halfway through the first act I was like, oh, this feels like a play. I bet it is, given Denzel Washington's involvement and him expressing his intentions of adapting August Wilson's plays. But I think that this was a great adaptation from a play to the screen in the sense that he maintained the atmosphere of a play throughout. Like I can imagine every part of this play out on stage, specifically in the little vignettes that he speckled throughout. The one that stands out to me and probably my favorite scene in the movie is when Toledo is at the piano alone and he has that monologue, which sounds like a Def Jam poem where he talks about essentially the American mixing pot, or as he calls it, a stew that could not all be eaten, leaving leftovers. And then he says, "We are the leftovers. The colored man is the leftovers." And as he comes around to that defining line of the piece, we fade into these portraits of black women and men in their daily lives. And they're these vibrant, solemn moments that almost remind me of like the photo from the Great Depression, the migrant mother, the photo where the woman with the children during the Dust Bowl.
Mhm.
But my point is that these quiet moments of exposition, like those, are unique to the stage. Like I can imagine Toledo at the piano on the stage alone, completely dark with just one spotlight on him. And as it transitions to the portraits, it's just a single light that would highlight different players on the stage. And I love that he found a way to translate that onto the screen and maintain the feeling of a stage play.
I immediately thought of Glengarry Glen Ross.
I did too, yeah. It really did feel like that.
It does feel like that, and it feels like that because the staging of it does feel like a play, mostly because they're just in mainly 2 rooms the whole time. In this, the lead characters, they do go outside a little bit, especially in the very beginning.
Yeah.
There's moments where they are outside, they're on the street. There's a part where Ma gets into a car accident, but mainly they're just in the recording studio the whole time. In the same way Glengarry Glen Ross is just in the office and then the restaurant across the street. It's not adapted like a play. For example, A Few Good Men, which
Mhm.
has more of a cinematic flair to it.
Yeah.
This one did feel like that play setting. And again, that's okay. Let me ask you this though first, before we get into that. What did you think of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom?
I loved it.
So did I.
Yeah, I thought it was beautiful. To go back to what you're saying about the plays, I think the thing that tipped me off was just the long scenes.
Yes.
In a regular adaptation, like you said, A Few Good Men, they would probably split those dialogue scenes into different scenes to just give it more of a cinematic feel. Whereas
Mhm.
this didn't feel the need to stray away from that. They made it feel as though it was a stage play, and which is nice, right? You like being in a room with actors who are good at what they do because they can hold your attention for an extended period of time.
Oh, and everybody in this movie holds your
Mhm.
attention.
Oh, everyone.
Every single person.
Mhm.
All 4 of the members of the band
Yeah.
shine. Like, there is not a
Mhm.
a bad performance in this. And like you were saying before, Glenn Turman, he plays Toledo. He's probably going to, other than Boseman and Viola Davis, get the other Oscar nomination because you can't nominate too many people in one movie. More than likely, he gets the other flashiest or most dramatic performance of this. We're not spoiling things yet. We can a little bit later. But really, I mean, I think Coleman Domingo
I was
as
about to say,
Cutler,
yeah.
he's the one I remembered because he has what you and I talk about as the Mark Wahlberg in the
I was
fighter part.
I'm so glad you said it.
And
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know understand Maya Andrews' inside bit, Mark Wahlberg in The Fighter plays the straight man. He is the
Yeah.
guy who's kind of the boring person around all of this craziness going on. His
Mhm.
crack addict brother, his bossy mom, his trashy waitress wife, and he's the guy who kind of has to just be down the middle. Coleman Domingo does
Well,
that
yeah, they're the grounding element, right? Amidst the cast of characters that are just so dynamic and so
big.
varying in temperament, you need someone like Cutler. To use a musical term, he's like the baseline. You don't always notice him, but you would if he wasn't around. And I agree. I was gonna say the same thing in that he's Mark Wahlberg in The Fighter because he plays the straight man, but he's also not boring. He did have a lot of these moments where he had an opportunity to shine without ever taking over the scene, and not
Mhm,
because he isn't capable, but because I think he understood that success in that role wasn't about what he put forth, rather what he withheld.
mhm.
And the whole time he was essentially the diplomat who's just trying to keep the war at bay.
He is a very calming, sturdy presence in this movie with a lot of bigness
Hmm.
going on around it. And that's normally we see that as, like we just said, Mark Wahlberg in The Fighter, where he's the protagonist, that character. Your hero's journey characters, your Luke
Yeah.
Skywalker. Luke Skywalker, kind of boring. Everybody likes
Hmm.
Han Solo and Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
It's interesting that in this movie, that character was a supporting character, and Levy, Chadwick Boseman, is who the movie's about, and he
Hmm.
is, for all intents and purposes, the biggest and flashiest of them all. So it's an interesting role reversal.
Chadwick's performance, at first I was like, I don't know if I'm sold on it yet. I was
Mhm,
unsure at first because it did feel a little bit too big. But you quickly realize his whole persona is this contrived bravado meant to divert attention from his fractured self, as you find out in his monologue. And I was just in awe at that monologue. And while you're watching that scene, he took the role just for that 2 minutes of an actor's paradise.
He had a really good 1-2 punch at the end. He had this, and then he was in Spike Lee's Five Bloods
Hmm.
that came out, what, 6, 7, 8 months ago, also
Yeah.
on Netflix, which is very good, and he's really good in that too.
Yeah, it feels like Heath Ledger is it's like his career was just gaining momentum. I mean, obviously he was big from
Black
Black
Panther.
Panther and he's done a lot of things in the past, but this is where it felt like he was starting to go into the kind of the
Black Panther didn't get to showcase what he gets to do, though. If anything,
no,
Black
I
Panther is one
agree.
of the most boring Marvel characters around,
Hmm.
especially as a hero, and the Marvel heroes are, by and large, not as interesting,
Yeah.
to be honest. He's been in so much too. He was James Brown, he was Jackie
Hmm.
Robinson, he was so many of these iconic American figures,
Yeah.
and just seeing him in this too, obviously, Levy is not an iconic American figure. Ma Rainey is, but man, I did not expect this performance from Chadwick Boseman.
It was just great all around, and I believed every emotion he portrayed during that main monologue because he really is manic in that he cycles through anger, sadness, like sadistic glee. I mean, that scene not only sums up his character, but his performance as a whole.
And that's contrasted with Ma Rainey herself, who
Yeah.
is another sturdy presence, just like
Mhm.
Coleman Domingo's character, but sturdy in a almost caustic way. And she gets to do so much. And Viola Davis once, I remember seeing an interview with her, and it might not have been an interview. It might been one of those Hollywood roundtable that they do around the Oscars. I don't remember where I saw this, but
Yeah.
she gave an interview where she said one of her favorite performances that she's ever done was when she did a guest role on Law and Order, and she plays a murderer. And she goes, I love doing that because I got to be a terrible person. And she
Mhm.
says, Black women in Hollywood don't get to be that. They have to be these sort of saintly figures,
Otherly,
can't do
yeah.
anything wrong types. And she goes, it was great to be so vile.
Yeah.
And she gets to be vile in this movie. But she also gets to do so much too. She gets to do that. She gets to be brash. She's spiteful, but she's also big and she's full of life and she's charismatic and she's all of these things all at once. And so there's no doubt in my mind that she is going to at least get an Oscar nomination. She should get a win
Oh
for
yeah.
this.
And at first she comes off as kind of the typical diva, but it's the moments with her nephew specifically, her kindness toward him, you begin to understand her motivation before she even explicitly expresses it to Cutler at about kind of the halfway point.
She also kind of uses him to prove a point, though, and to wield the power that she has within the studio. She knows that he's a stutterer and that
Yeah.
he's going to screw it up. She doesn't care. She goes, no, I want this guy to do it. We're going to do it until he gets it right. And I don't care how many records it costs you,
Hmm.
studio. You're going to do it my way because the one thing I have is what you need.
Yeah.
And so until you get it, we're doing things my way. And she has a monologue also in this where she goes over that and explains that too in a really great monologue.
She talks about, the insincerity of the white man's respect of her derives from a place of exploitation, and that
Mhm,
she, like you said, is in a position to demand what she's entitled to as a human being, be it with white people, but even the black men in her band. I mean, she even lashes out at them, albeit not as harshly, but it's because black women are also marginalized by the black men in the community. So they're marginalized by racism, but also sexism. And I mean, Ma Rainey was, when you think about it, the most marginalized type of person in America. I mean, she was black, she was a woman, and she was openly bisexual.
mhm.
Like a person like her didn't receive equality of rights under the law until about 6 years ago with the legalization of gay marriage. But it makes sense why she's also so caring toward her nephew, played by Dusan Brown, who has a stutter and he's a young black man. But she, I think, realizes that he would otherwise be written off very quickly. And I think that that's also another reason, not only to prove the point, like you said, but also that she wants to give him an opportunity because he is going to have a rough life. He's going to have a rough go at it because people like him are just written off right away. And so, I mean, I will say though, I didn't want to laugh, but, and this just speaks to Chadwick Boseman's performance in this, but his reaction to hearing the stutter, I was busting up. It
Oh, it
was
was funny.
hilarious.
It was
It
supposed
was
to be funny.
so funny. And the kid's insistence, like, talking shit back to him, like, it's so
And
great.
he's kinda just going
Yeah.
like well, no, no, you." And he's like, "Oh, get on with it."
Well, yeah, and I love that moment for his character because someone with a stutter would likely hesitate to speak up for themselves, but his confidence when he does talk back just shows you the influence that Ma probably had on him. And she probably told him, "Hey, look, you're going to be written off no matter what, be it your stutter or the fact that you're a black man. So you might as well stand up for yourself."
I also really liked, speaking of the comedy in this movie, because this movie is, despite the heavy themes that it's playing with, it's, I don't think, incredibly in your face about them. I mean, they do have monologues quite literally about what it is to be black in the early 20th century in
Yeah.
America, but it's incredibly watchable, and it runs. Like, this movie
Hmm.
sings, and
Yeah.
I'm using that pun liberally, but
Yeah.
it does, and it has that play tone where it's a rat-tat-tat, back and forth type of dialogue, and I found it to be incredibly watchable.
I agree. I didn't feel like it dragged on at all. I don't think it was so much not in your face because the whole thing is about very heavy themes, but I think the way they went about it was commendable because it didn't feel cumbersome in the way that a lot of films about heavy subjects like this can be. It was still fun without diluting the themes. And even when it did get heavy, they expressed it in a very interesting and poetic way. And I think this is probably a good place to get into spoilers. I'll put time codes in the description below.
I don't think it's a spoiler, though, because have you watched the trailer for this movie?
They don't show it, do they?
So they show the moment. We're gonna talk about spoilers now if you don't wanna be spoiled for the minor, I guess, plot, and again, it's a thing that if you know anything about history, you know immediately where it's going, but
But it's
nevertheless,
it's not a true story, though.
no, it's not a true story, but
Yeah.
this, we're talking about the moment, and I'm assuming what you're talking about is when the record producer takes Levy's songs from him and
Oh, no, I
rips
wasn't
them
talking about
off.
that.
Oh, no, that's not what you were gonna talk about?
I
What
was
were you
talking
gonna
about
say?
the stabbing. Well, it is correlated.
Oh, I guess, yeah, the stabbing
Yeah.
too. I thought I thought the more devastating thing
It is, yeah.
was the record producer stealing his songs away from him, stealing his soul, really, because that's all he has. That is what his life is devoted to, is music.
And I'm so glad that I mean, I'm not glad, but I like the decision that he ends up stabbing Toledo, who merely steps on his shoe
Yeah,
by accident, and not who you'd expect, Mr. Sturtevant, who essentially stole his music, stole his soul, like you were saying. Because the unfortunate truth is that the quote unquote black on black violence is just a derivative of oppression. And I love that you see Levy's fate foreshadowed in the door motif as well, where he keeps going back to this door. He's almost obsessed with it because a door, although closed, is still a sign of hope. And then after multiple attempts and putting all of his strength behind it, he finally breaks through, only to find a brick wall. And at that moment, you know his fate, if not just from historical context of what used to happen to black musicians at the
I
time.
don't think there was any other way it could end. And
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
maybe if you just know the history of jazz music, or in this case, the blues, but really white record producers stealing black musicians' songs and then giving them to
White
white
musicians. Yeah.
musicians to play. Like, that's how the movie ends, is that you see Levy's song.
And the moment he hands him the music, you know what's going to happen. You're just like, oh, come on, dude. Come on.
And that's the crux of it. You see
Mhm.
kind of the lights of Levy's hope and dreams and ambitions just go out in that moment. And it's heartbreaking. It was such a heartbreaking scene. And Chadwick Boseman is, again, going to get an Oscar for this. And that scene where he stabs Toledo, that's
Mhm.
what's going to earn Glenn Turman his Oscar too, or at least it should, in my opinion.
And that moment wasn't overplayed. It was very toned down.
Yeah, nobody really knows what happened. It kind of just, it's such a shock to everybody that no one knows how to react in the room.
Yeah, I think Cutler looks at him and he's almost in shock that he doesn't even know how to react to it. He doesn't
Mhm.
even try to help Toledo. And then the other band member, I forget his name, the
Slow
bass
drag.
player, yeah, Slow Drag, he just turns away. And that's something that Slow Drag seems to always do because when they started hearing the stutter, Slow Drag turns away because
Mhm.
he doesn't want to laugh. And the same thing with this, he turns away because he doesn't want. And I think that it's interesting that I feel like every one of the band members or every character in the film embodies almost an archetype of the black community. The people like Toledo who want to unite to fight for their rights, Levy who just wants to fight for his, and then you have Slow Drag who seems to turn away or ignore the situations and just wants to live his life, just play his music. And then Cutler who is fine with the status quo and is just thankful for what he has and just wants everyone to calm down and get along.
The heat too
Mhm.
of the day
Oh yeah.
plays a lot into it. And I think that having that, everybody in this movie looks hot.
Mhm.
Like, Ma Rainey, she's just sweating the whole time,
The
and her
whole time.
makeup is just kinda, like, streaked down her face, and it feels oppressively hot in that
Yeah.
room, and that George Wolfe, who directed the movie, who I think he should get a Best Director nomination for this
Mhm.
based on the performances alone. Like, granted, there's nothing in this movie that is, "Ooh, look at the flashy shots, look at the big tracking shot."
It wasn't flashy, but it was still shot incredibly well. And like I was saying before, his decision to maintain the feeling of a stage play allowed for those more poetic moments that are somewhat removed from reality, but made it feel like a work of art. He didn't feel the need to contort the structure to fit cinema. Instead, it felt like he made cinema fit the stage play mold, which is
Mhm.
contrary to conventional wisdom. You adapt a piece to the medium in which you're telling the story in. But I agree. I think that he definitely did earn it on just performances alone, but also the ability to shoot those scenes primarily made up of nonstop dialogue. I mean, it is a play in a very interesting way. It wasn't the typical shot, reverse shot dialogue scene. You felt like you were in the room with them.
Yeah, it does. I mean, all of the technical awards, the lighting, the cinematography, the costumes, just
Hmm.
all of that,
Yeah.
should definitely be at least nominated because everything about this movie looks gorgeous. It really does.
Yeah, and even when they're doing the multiple takes, just the cutting between the lights,
And the records being thrown
yeah,
away.
exactly, and I love the moment when the nephew finally gets it down, because in the background, you see Chadwick turn around in surprise, and then Ma immediately begins to sing, and Christina brought up a good point, is that there isn't even a beat between him getting it right and then her starting to sing, as if she knew all along that he'd get it down, and it's a great heartwarming moment because she looks at him with pride, and then he begins to dance for her. I love that scene too.
Jeremy Shamos. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. He's the guy who plays the manager that you just
I feel
mentioned too. And I liked it because he does bring a lot of comedy too.
He does.
And his just frustration the whole time of just going like, "Ah, I just wanna why can't we just make the record and just go home? And why can't I just do my job? And can't everything just be good?"
I love when she walks out and then Sturtevant walks out and he's like, "If you walk out of this studio, you're finished." And then he's like, "God damn it, Sturtevant." And then he like runs after, like, "Shut up, dude." Like, you're not making it any easier.
You're not helping.
Yeah, like, you're not going to impose your authority on this woman. She doesn't give a fly. She almost hit a cop in the first
Yeah,
scene.
she did.
And you're just like, "Oh god." And I think that that was a very good scene to bring her in on because you see the extent to which she will not withhold her own emotions or what she has to say. She does not hold back. You always know what Ma Rainey is thinking.
Boy, do you.
There's something interesting in the play, which makes sense in the format of a play, but she doesn't show up until she arrives at the studio. And they added those scenes where, she's performing in the first scene and then she's leaving the hotel, that type of stuff. Those were all added. Do you like the decision or do you wish that they would have withheld her until, bringing her in maybe at the second act? I think that's really when she would have come in.
No, that's the natural point where she should have come in, and I understand why they did it. You got a movie called Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, you got Viola Davis in it. I guarantee you some producer on this movie was like, "No, no, you
Yeah.
show her minute 1,
Yeah.
and then we don't see her for a good 25 minutes, and then
Mhm.
it's natural." You feel like she should have come in at minute 25, at the beginning of act 2.
Well, and
I think it would have been more impactful to see
I
her
agree.
kind of burst into the studio that way,
Yeah.
but I'm
But
gonna guess
also,
they got some sort of note about that.
yeah, that definitely felt like a studio decision. I personally would have loved the play version more because I've always loved when you hear about a character from the perspective of the surrounding characters before ever meeting them. In the way that you hear about Jay Gatsby before ever meeting him, it adds to this mystery, but also tells you a lot about them from the way that other people perceive them.
Myth-making type of quality to it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Very
Like
Marcellus Wallace and
yeah,
Pulp Fiction type feel.
exactly. That's a perfect way to put it. Marcellus Wallace in Pulp Fiction.
Although in this movie, Ma Rainey doesn't have a Band-Aid on the back of her neck, keeping her soul inside.
She might as
Or
well have.
the place where his soul was sucked out. Either
Yeah.
one, whichever you'd like to ascribe to for Pulp Fiction. No, overall, I thought this movie was fantastic. It is, I think I don't think, I know, one of my top 5 favorite movies of the year. It is that
Wow,
high. Oh,
really?
oh, yes. No, I loved it so much, and I kept thinking about it afterwards, and
Yeah.
that's how I knew it was really good because it was lower on that list. You know, as
Mhm.
I was thinking about it, I'm going back, okay, 2020 movies, and I'm saying, what did I like the most? What did I like the most? And Ma Rainey's Black Bottom just kept coming up in my mind, and it kept going up and up and up. And I think this sits really high. Do you feel the same way?
No, I would agree. Definitely a standout from last year. I mean, sure, the box office was scarce, but this was an all-around great film.
Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Watch it. It's really good.
Definitely worth the watch. But I think that about does it for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And if you've seen it, we'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, did you agree or disagree with anything we discussed? Next week, we'll be watching another Netflix original, The White Tiger, so check it out and join us for next week's discussion. As we've mentioned before, we are shooting to reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube to become partners, so if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing. If you have any ideas for a theme you'd like us to discuss, or a film, TV show, anything pop culture, let us know on YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find all those links on channel8.5.com. That's channel8.5, completely spelled out.com.
We have new episodes every Thursday. Until next time, my name is Joe Galino.
And I'm Andrew Hanna, and this is Channel 8.5.